Imagine being a teenager, flying first class on what should be the trip of a lifetime, only to face cold dismissal, suspicion, and outright hostility. Two brilliant black twin girls, Nia and Nova Caldwell, armed with nothing but their dignity and determination, encounter a flight attendant who refuses to believe they belong. What happens when a simple request for a glass of orange juice spirals into a humiliating confrontation miles above the ground? What does it take to turn prejudice into power? Their father, Elijah Caldwell, a powerful CEO, receives a call from his daughters that will change everything, forcing an entire plane to turn around and grounding Flight 709 before it even leaves the runway. This is not just a story about discrimination. It's about quiet strength, fierce love, and the ripples one family can make against systemic injustice. Who really holds the power at 30,000 feet? How far will someone go to defend their family's dignity? And what does it mean for all of us watching? If you believe in justice, respect, and standing up when it counts, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe to our channel. Let's dive into this unforgettable journey together. The first time someone glanced at Nia Caldwell like she didn't belong, she let it slide. She was used to it. In debate club, at summer tech camps, at charity galas standing next to her father, Elijah Caldwell, the man behind Caldwell Dynamics, that quiet tilt of the head, the scanning eyes, the momentary pause as if something didn't compute. But that day at Terminal 7 of Larchmont International Airport, it was different, because this time, she wasn't alone. Her twin sister, Nova, had noticed it too. She didn't say a word about it, but Nia could always read her. The way Nova clutched her book tighter and shifted slightly in her seat as they sat down in the first-class lounge. It was a beautiful space-glass walls, low lighting, soft jazz humming under the chatter of businessmen and influencers. But something about it felt monitored, like they were being tolerated, not welcomed. Still, Nia smiled as a lounge attendant offered them sparkling water. Nova whispered, "Thank you." Their matching carry-ons rested beside them, spotless white with gold initials. They had earned this moment, every bit of it. They weren't flying for fun. They were flying to Zurich, Switzerland, to present their joint project, a groundbreaking AI model for clean water access in front of global leaders at the Next Gen Summit. Only 15 projects were selected. They were the youngest team, and the only black girls on the list. Their father had planned to fly with them, but a last-minute crisis with an overseas merger grounded him in New York. Nia could still hear his voice from the night before. "You've earned this flight," he had said, eyes soft with pride on the video call. "Fly first class, be bold, and if anyone questions you, you call me." It had seemed like such a distant, unnecessary warning then. She didn't think she'd need it. Now, sitting in a lounge where no one looked like them, where even the staff wore smiles that evaporated when passing their seats, she wasn't so sure. Nia turned to Nova, nudging her gently. "You okay?" Nova nodded. "Yeah, just watching." Nia followed her gaze. A middle-aged white woman in a fitted beige pantsuit, diamond earrings. Expensive skin was staring at them from across the room. Her gaze wasn't hostile, just curious, unblinking, clinical, like they were a riddle. Nova looked down and pulled her sleeves over her hands. Nia didn't. Instead, she held eye contact. 1 heartbeat. 2. The woman finally looked away. A boarding call rang out gently over the lounge speakers. "Now boarding Orion Air Flight 709 to Zurich. First class and priority passengers. Please proceed to Gate B9. The twins rose in unison as they walked toward the gate. The hush of the lounge seemed to follow them. Nia held her head high. She wasn't about to shrink. Nova rolled her carry-on beside her, still holding her well-worn copy of Algorithms for a Better World like a shield. Gate B9 was already lined with business travelers and polished passengers scrolling through phones and murmuring into AirPods. A red carpet unfurled toward the jet bridge, flanked by two sharply dressed gate agents. One smiled when she scanned their digital passes. Seats 1A and 1B, right this way. Enjoy your flight. They stepped onto the plane. The air was cool and perfumed. First class was its own world. 12 fully enclosed suites in champagne gold and slate gray. Soft leather, quilted pillows, windows so large you could see the world curve. And then came her, Claire Denton, flight lead, 40-something. Blonde hair pulled so tightly into a bun it looked like it hurt. Crisp lipstick, eyes that scanned before they smiled. She was waiting by the entrance to first class. "Welcome aboard," she said, tone bright but detached. Her eyes flickered over them, first to their faces, then their boarding passes. A fractional pause, just enough to register. Then she smiled, too tightly. "First class is down this way. Please follow me." Nia caught the almost imperceptible glance Claire gave to the white man behind them in a three-piece suit, as if silently verifying who belonged where. They followed her to the front row, 1A and 1B, prime seats, no one ahead, full recline, closest to the cabin crew, closest to the scrutiny. As Nia settled into her pod, she exhaled slowly. She wasn't going to let Claire Denton's smile get under her skin. "Nice. Right," she said to Nova. Nova smiled faintly. "I still can't believe we're flying like this." "You better believe it." Nia grinned. "Dad said we travel like CEOs. They stowed their bags, explored the little compartments, reclined the seat a little. Then Nia pressed the service button. A few seconds later, a young male flight attendant appeared. His name tag read Eli. He looked fresh out of college. Friendly. "Can I get you ladies a welcome drink?" he asked. "Cheerful and genuine." "I'd love an orange juice," Nia said. "Please, just water for me," Nova added softly. "Absolutely. Be right back." But before Eli could turn fully toward the galley, Claire Denton intercepted him. It was quick, too quick. A quiet exchange, a shake of her head, a small frown. Eli's posture stiffened. He glanced over his shoulder at them, then turned and walked away toward the rear of the cabin. 10 minutes passed. No drinks came. Instead, Claire returned. Her tone was colder now, rehearsed. "I'm sorry. We're a bit behind on pre-flight checks. Beverage service will begin once we're in the air." Nia blinked. "Oh, I just saw that gentleman in 2C get a scotch." Claire's jaw tightened. "Just slightly. He's a Premier Platinum member. Certain courtesies are extended." The word courtesies landed like a slap. Nova looked down. Nia didn't. Instead, she said, "Understood." Claire turned without another word. As she disappeared into the galley, Nia leaned closer to Nova and whispered, "Okay, so that's how we're starting." Nova didn't reply, but her fingers clenched her seat arm. The cabin doors hissed shut. The plane shuddered slightly as the engine whine began to build. The safety video started to play. Bright colors, happy faces, masks and life vests and oxygen tubes. But Nia wasn't watching the screen. She was watching the way Claire laughed softly with Mrs. Margot Ellery across the aisle. How their eyes flicked briefly in the twins' direction. It was subtle. It always was. But Nia had learned something from her father. Power doesn't always speak loudly. Sometimes it just watches and waits. And Nia Caldwell had no intention of staying quiet. Not this time. Not for 7 hours. The moment the plane left the gate, a silence fell over first class, not the kind that brought peace, but the kind that filled your ears with unspoken things. The hum of tension was louder than the engines. Nia adjusted her seatbelt and stared out the window as the plane began its slow taxi. Her reflection hovered faintly in the glass calm face. Clear eyes, but something simmering underneath. Across the aisle, Mrs. Margot Ellery was sipping champagne delicately, one pinky raised like she was performing for someone. She wore a string of white pearls and a smug smile that made Nia's skin crawl. Claire Denton, the flight attendant, was laughing softly with her again, nodding toward something on Margot's tablet. Every so often, both of them would glance over at the twins' row with that same look Nia had come to know well. Nova hadn't said a word in nearly 10 minutes. She had tucked her book under the seat and sat with her arms crossed, her legs folded tightly beneath her like she was trying to disappear. That was Nova's way: absorb everything, say nothing, and carry the weight in silence. But even silence, when it's laced with fear and frustration, can feel deafening. Nia reached for her sister's hand and gave it a squeeze. Nova squeezed back. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I know," Nia replied, "but you shouldn't have to be." "From the galley?" Claire reappeared. Her eyes swept the cabin with professional precision. She offered more champagne to Mr. Reyes in 3C, and then leaned over the divider to pour another round for Mrs. Ellery. Her voice was warm, almost syrupy. Then she turned and walked past 1A and 1B like the seats were empty, not even a glance. Eli, the younger flight attendant, stood awkwardly a few rows back. He looked toward the twins, then toward Claire, and then away again. He wanted to help. That much was obvious, but something about the situation had silenced him. Maybe it was the hierarchy. Maybe it was fear. Either way, he didn't move. Nia pressed the service button again. Nothing happened. After a few minutes, she stood up. "Where are you going?" Nova asked. Eyes wide. Nia didn't answer. She stepped into the aisle and made her way toward the front galley. Claire was there, organizing silverware with exacting grace. "Excuse me," Nia said politely. Claire looked up slowly, her expression unreadable. "Yes." "Miss Caldwell." Nia paused. There was no aggression in her tone, just measured calm. "I just wanted to follow up on the orange juice and blanket we asked for earlier. I understand if you're busy, but it's been a while." Claire didn't blink. "As I explained, we're behind on pre-flight checks. Beverage service begins once we're in the air." "I understand," Nia said, "but other passengers have already been served." Claire's smile hardened, but her voice remained cool. "Those passengers are Platinum Elite. Certain privileges are extended. We ask for your patience." There it was again. That word, privileges. Nia nodded slowly. "All right, just making sure I understood." She returned to her seat without another word. Nova looked at her nervously. "What happened?" "Apparently, courtesy is only extended to certain zip codes," Nia said under her breath. The plane turned onto the runway. The engines roared louder. The safety video played again on the individual screens. Nia didn't watch. Nova pretended to. From across the aisle, Mrs. Ellery leaned closer to Claire as she passed and whispered something. Claire chuckled lightly, then walked toward the rear of the cabin again. Nia felt the heat rise behind her eyes, but she kept it contained. No one here was going to see her break. No one was going to take her calm from her. She looked down at the blanket in her lap and saw it a small gray stain, like makeup smudged into the fibers. "Nova," she said, lifting the corner. "Do you see this?" Nova nodded. "Yeah. It was there when we sat down. I didn't want to say anything." Nia pressed the service button again. "Nothing." "Are you really going to try again?" Nova whispered. "Of course I am." Claire returned eventually, offering a small smile to someone 2 rows back. When she reached their seats, she paused, as if surprised the light was on. "Yes," she asked, tone tight. Nia held up the blanket. "There's a stain here. Could I get a clean one? Please." Claire took the blanket from her and examined it with dramatic slowness. "This has been sanitized. It's perfectly clean. I understand, but it's stained. We don't have an unlimited supply," Claire snapped. "You'll have to make do." She folded the blanket and placed it back on the ottoman, then turned and walked away. Nova stared at her seatbelt. "Maybe let it go," she said, voice low. Nia didn't reply. The aircraft began its rumbling acceleration down the runway. The cabin shook gently as the nose lifted and the wheels left the earth. They were airborne. The world grew quiet except for the steady hum of altitude. Nia turned to look at the call light above their row. It was off. She hadn't touched it again. She didn't need to. This wasn't about juice. This wasn't about a blanket. It was about message. It was about exclusion so quiet and careful it couldn't be quoted. But everyone in first class had heard it. "You don't belong here." Nia leaned her head against the sidewall and let out a slow breath. She thought about the thousands of times she'd been told to work harder, be better, smile more, to never cause trouble, to never appear angry, to be graceful even when people weaponized their own assumptions. Her father had taught her to never accept disrespect dressed as policy. Nova had always said not every fight was worth starting, but Nia had started to think that this one might be. Nova shifted beside her. "Are you really going to push it?" Nia looked out the window at the clouds. "This isn't pushing. This is standing." She turned back to her sister. "You don't have to do anything. I know you hate this stuff." "I don't hate it," Nova said softly. I wish it wasn't necessary." Nia smiled faintly. "Yeah, me too." They didn't speak for a while. From her pod, Mrs. Ellery raised her champagne flute again and made eye contact with Claire as she passed. Claire smiled warmly and poured her another glass without asking. It was choreographed, intimate. Nia leaned forward and pressed the call button again. She wasn't going to make do. She wasn't going to shrink. And if they forced her hand, they'd find out exactly what it meant to deny service at 30,000 feet to the wrong 2 girls. The flight had settled into its rhythm. Cabin lights dimmed. Engines purred. Passengers reclined into comfort, wrapped in soft blankets, cradling glasses of wine and whispers of power. But for Nia and Nova Caldwell in seats 1A and 1B, comfort hadn't arrived. They hadn't been served a drink. Their blanket request had been dismissed. Their service button had been ignored 3 times. And now Claire Denton walked past them again, smiling brightly at a gentleman in 2D, adjusting his pillow and offering him a warm towel. Nova shifted beside Nia and whispered, "Maybe she just forgot. Maybe this isn't about us." Nia glanced sideways. Not angry, just tired. You saw her serve him a second drink and fluff his pillow. She didn't forget. Nova looked down. Her hands were in her lap, fingers twisting the edge of the book she hadn't touched since takeoff. "I just don't want to cause a scene," she murmured. "You're not causing anything," Nia said gently. You asked for water. Nova nodded slowly. But her shoulders were tight, like she was trying to make herself smaller in the plush cocoon of her seat. Claire returned to the galley once more, offering smiles like they were rationed for everyone but rows 1A and 1B. Across the aisle, Margot Ellery had now removed her shoes and was comfortably tucked into her seat, sipping something amber from a glass tumbler. She laughed at something on her phone, then looked up and met Nia's eyes just for a moment. It wasn't a cruel look, not overt. It was a look of amusement, of casual dismissal. The kind of look you give when you're confident the world agrees with you. And that was when Nia noticed it. On the edge of her blanket, folded at her side, was the same faint stain from earlier, a grayish blur, like a smudge of lipstick or foundation. She had mentioned it once. She hadn't pushed. But now, staring at it again, something shifted in her chest. It wasn't the stain that bothered her. It was the idea that someone, somewhere in the crew chain, had seen it and decided it was good enough for her. She leaned forward and pressed the call button. A soft chime. This time, Claire came directly. Nia held the blanket up gently. I asked earlier, but I'm asking again. There's a visible stain here. Could I have a different one? Please. Claire didn't touch the blanket. She simply looked at it, then at Nia. Her expression didn't change. Our blankets are pre-packaged and sanitized. That mark is superficial. Nia smiled politely. I understand, but I'd still like a clean one. We don't have an unlimited supply. I'm not asking for unlimited, just one that hasn't been worn by someone else. Claire's voice lost even the pretense of warmth. You'll have to make do. She turned and walked away. Nova didn't say anything, but her eyes welled. Nia looked at her, the weight of it all pressing into her chest, the juice, the water, the blanket, the way they were being treated like outliers, like glitches in the first-class algorithm. Nova wiped her eyes quietly. I'm sorry, she whispered. Nia shook her head. You don't owe anyone an apology. I should have said something sooner. When you pressed the button the first time, you shouldn't have to fight to be treated like a person. She leaned closer. But I'm done whispering. Nova gave her a look. Familiar. Concerned. You're not going to yell. Are you? Nia laughed softly, though her voice was steady. No. I'm going to be very calm. That's what makes them nervous. Claire returned a moment later, delivering dessert to Mrs. Ellery, a tiny tart and a hot espresso, served with silver tongs. As she passed their row, Nia sat up and said clearly, Excuse me. Claire didn't stop. Nia unbuckled her belt and stood. Excuse me, she said again. Claire turned sharply. You need to be seated. Miss Caldwell. I will, Nia said evenly. Right after you explain why my sister and I are the only ones in this cabin being ignored. The entire first-class section went still. Mr. Reyes in 3C lowered his newspaper. Mrs. Ellery shifted slightly in her seat, her eyes glittering with interest. Claire blinked once, but her face remained composed. I've already explained. We're following standard procedure. You gave the man behind me a drink. You brought that woman a pastry. My sister asked for water. I asked for a blanket. Both were denied. Claire's jaw tightened. There is no targeted mistreatment here. You are imagining things. Nia nodded slowly. That's your story. Claire's nostrils flared. You're disrupting the cabin. I suggest you sit down. I'm not raising my voice. I haven't left my assigned seat. I'm asking a question. Nia took one step forward. Is it our age? She paused. Or something else? Claire opened her mouth. But before she could speak, Mrs. Ellery chimed in from across the aisle. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said with a theatrical sigh. The entitlement of children these days. She looked at Claire with a smirk. If they can't handle the service in first class, perhaps they're not ready to be here. Nia turned slowly. I'm sorry, ma'am. Do you work here? Mrs. Ellery blinked, then gave a forced laugh. No, dear. I just appreciate order. Nia didn't answer. Nova stood up. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was clear. We didn't ask for special treatment. We asked to be treated the same as everyone else. Claire stepped between them. That's it. I'm alerting the captain. If you continue this disruptive behavior, we'll be forced to remove you. Nova's lips parted slightly. Nia stepped in front of her. Remove us. She laughed once, softly. For asking for water. Claire didn't answer. Nia's voice dropped, low and calm. If you're going to have us removed, you should do it quickly. Claire tilted her head. And why is that? Because the moment you do, Nia said, I'm calling my father. There was something in the way she said it. Not threat, not fear, just certainty. Claire hesitated, then turned and stormed toward the cockpit. Behind her, whispers began to move through the cabin. Mr. Reyes leaned forward in his seat. Mrs. Ellery was no longer smirking. Nova's hand found her sister's. You really meant it, didn't you? She whispered. Nia's eyes were fixed ahead. Absolutely. She sat down, buckled in, and reached for her phone. Because when respect is denied, justice often comes at 30,000 feet. The cabin lights glowed soft and golden, like the inside of a jewelry box. Everything looked polished, untouchable. But tension, real and raw, was now woven into every corner. Claire Denton's shoes clicked sharply across the galley floor as she disappeared toward the cockpit, radio in hand, shoulders drawn tight. The calm veneer she had maintained was cracking. Nia Caldwell sat back in her seat, her phone resting in her lap. She wasn't calling her father yet, not yet, but the option hung there, like a loaded switch. Nova watched her silently. The younger twin's fingers trembled slightly where they rested on her thigh. She didn't say anything, not until Nia glanced over. You okay? Nova gave a small nod. That woman, she's really going to try to get us kicked off. I know. Nia's voice was even, grounded. Are you scared? Nova asked. There was a pause. Nia breathed in through her nose, held it, then let it out slowly. I'm angry, she said. I'm tired of pretending like we have to smile through this. Nova looked down at her lap, silent, a few rows back. Mr. Daniel Reyes shifted in his seat. He had removed his glasses and was polishing them slowly, watching without watching. The kind of man who'd learned to pick his moments carefully. He hadn't said a word, not yet, but his eyes had clocked everything. From the aisle, Mrs. Margot Ellery let out a huff, loud enough for all to hear. Well, I do hope they're removed. We've already been delayed enough. She was sipping her drink like it was a performance. The words floated across the cabin, toxic and deliberate. Nia looked at her, expression unreadable. But Nova turned, voice quiet but firm. You don't even know us. Mrs. Ellery blinked. Nova's hands were shaking, but her voice didn't waver. We worked hard to be here. We didn't win a ticket in a lottery. Our father bought our seats because he believes in us. All we wanted was water, a clean blanket, basic kindness. Margot's lips curled into a practiced smile. I'm sure your father is very proud. Nia reached over and gently touched Nova's arm. Don't, she said softly. She isn't worth your breath. At that moment, Claire reappeared from the front of the cabin, walking with rigid purpose. Behind her, the pilot's voice came through the intercom. Calm, flat. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief delay. We ask for your continued patience as we work to resolve a minor passenger issue. Thank you. The announcement ended. The engines held steady, but the aircraft had stopped moving. They weren't climbing. They weren't taxiing. They were waiting. Claire returned to 1A and 1B. Her expression was a mask, but her voice had lost its polish. Miss Caldwell, she said, addressing Nia directly, I have spoken with the captain. If you do not return to your seat and refrain from further disruption, you will be removed from the flight. Nia blinked once, slowly. I'm in my seat. Claire's jaw clenched. Your behavior has been inappropriate. Your tone. My tone, Nia said. Still calm. You've raised your voice. You've accused crew members of misconduct. I pointed out the difference in treatment. That's not misconduct. That's a fact. Claire's voice rose slightly. You are creating a hostile environment. Nia didn't flinch. No, I'm responding to one. The tension snapped across the cabin like static. Mrs. Ellery clucked her tongue. You know, there was a time people knew their place. Nova gasped softly. Every head in first class turned. Mr. Rhea sat up straighter, eyes narrowed. Nia turned to face Mrs. Ellery. You said that out loud, she said, voice calm, almost clinical. Claire looked horrified, but not at the comment, at the audience. Enough, Claire said. This conversation is over. She stepped forward, but before she could continue, a male voice cut through the cabin. I've heard enough. All eyes turned. Mr. Reyes stood slowly, folding his glasses in one hand. His voice was calm, but carried weight. I've been sitting here for the last 30 minutes. I saw everything, and I can tell you these young women have done nothing wrong. Claire froze. Mr. Reyes turned to face the cabin. They asked for water, for a clean blanket. Their tone was respectful. Their words were clear. The only thing disruptive here, he added, looking directly at Claire, is the way they've been treated. Claire opened her mouth, but he continued, I will be speaking to the captain personally if this continues, and I'd be happy to file a formal report. So would the rest of us. I imagine. He glanced around the cabin. Several heads nodded. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire looked cornered. For the first time, her hands trembled slightly at her sides. She turned and walked briskly back to the galley, disappearing again. The moment she left, Nova collapsed slightly into her seat. Someone spoke up. She whispered. Someone actually said something. Nia stared ahead, lips pressed together. Then she smiled faintly. Good. Let's hope it matters. Another 10 minutes passed. No movement. The plane sat on the tarmac, wheels idle, engines low and holding. Nia glanced at the seatback screen. Estimated departure time had changed. Delayed. Again. And then the intercom crackled to life. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We apologize for the delay. Due to a developing situation, we will be returning to the gate for further review. There was a pause. Please remain seated while we reposition. Cabin crew, prepare for arrival. The quiet in first class turned sharp. Claire reappeared, confusion in her eyes. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She looked toward Nia and Nova, But the girls didn't meet her gaze. They sat silently, side by side. Two black girls in seats 1A and 1B, in the cabin they had every right to be in. The plane began its slow turn back toward the terminal. Across the aisle, Margot Ellery muttered under her breath. What a circus! They should be arrested. Nova's eyes filled again. Not with sadness, with fury. Nia reached for her phone. I'm done waiting. Nova looked over. Are you calling him now? Nia didn't answer immediately. She tapped her father's contact photo. He answered on the second ring. Nia Elijah Caldwell's voice was alert. What's going on? She breathed once, then said calmly, Dad, we have a problem. Elijah Caldwell sat alone in his office, 13 floors above Midtown, staring at the blinking cursor on his laptop. The city outside was alive, horns blaring, lights flickering, but inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. He checked the time on his phone again. Flight 709 should have taken off 15 minutes ago. He trusted his daughters. He trusted their preparation, their maturity, their intelligence, but he didn't trust the world they were flying through. When Nia's name lit up his screen, he answered before the second ring. Nia. Her voice came through steady, but he knew her well enough to hear the steel beneath it. Dad, we have a problem. He closed the laptop slowly. I'm listening. Nia gave him the rundown. No dramatics, no fluff. Just facts. The drink, the blanket, the condescension, the dismissal, the threat of removal, and the words spoken so effortlessly about knowing one's place. Elijah didn't interrupt once. He didn't need to. Every word painted a picture he'd seen too many times before. When Nia finished, there was a long silence. Then his voice dropped to something low. Controlled. Dangerous. Stay in your seat. Say nothing. Don't engage. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Nia replied. Nova, is she with you? I'm here, Nova said softly. He closed his eyes for a brief moment. I'm going to take care of this. He didn't say I love you. Not because he didn't feel it, but because right now, the safest thing his daughters could feel was not emotion. It was protection. He pressed a button on his desk intercom. Gwen, he said. His executive assistant's voice came instantly through the speaker. Yes, Mr. Caldwell. Get me Malcolm Cho at Orion Air. Now. No waiting. Emergency priority. Yes, sir. He stood, slowly rolling the sleeves of his charcoal suit jacket up to his forearms. The view of the city behind him framed his reflection in the glass. His jaw tightened. He had built Caldwell Dynamics from nothing. 20 years ago, he couldn't afford cab fare across town. Now he had offices in 5 countries, a seat on the World Tech Ethics Board, and annual contracts worth 9 figures. But all the power, all the prestige, couldn't keep 2 young black girls from being reduced to question marks in the eyes of people who still thought first class had a complexion. He hadn't raised his daughters to be quiet, but he had taught them patience. Now, it was his turn. The speaker buzzed again. Mr. Cho, on line 1, Gwen said. Elijah picked up the phone. Malcolm, he said. The voice on the other end was caught off guard. Elijah, good evening. I assume this isn't a social call. No, Elijah replied flatly. It isn't. What's going on? My daughters are on Flight 709 to Zurich, first class, seats 1A and 1B. I see. There is a problem. Elijah continued. A flight lead named Claire Denton has, for the last 35 minutes, ignored their basic requests. She served other passengers around them, refused water, mocked a stained blanket, and now she's threatened to remove them for questioning her. Malcolm didn't respond right away. Elijah continued, "There is also a passenger, Margot Ellery, who told them, and I quote, 'People should know their place.'" Now Malcolm spoke, his tone stiff. "That's unacceptable." "It's more than unacceptable," Elijah said. "It's documented. There are witnesses, and I assume there are cameras in the cabin." "There are," Malcolm confirmed. Elijah walked toward the window. "My company spends just under $52 million a year with your airline, executive travel, cargo transport, global mobility contracts. We've never had a single incident until today, and I will personally make sure this is addressed," Malcolm began. "No," Elijah interrupted. "You will do more than address it." He paused, each word deliberate. "You will turn that plane around." There was silence. "Elijah, the flight is already on the tarmac." "I know," he said calmly, "but it hasn't taken off." "There's still time. This isn't that simple." "It is," Elijah said, voice quiet but razor sharp. "Because if that flight leaves the ground with my daughters on board after being humiliated, ignored, and targeted, I will instruct my board to begin a full and public review of all contracts with Orion Air, effective immediately." Another pause. "You're serious?" "As a heart attack." Malcolm let out a breath. "I'll make the call." Elijah didn't say thank you. He just ended the call. He walked back to his desk, pressed the intercom again. "Gwen?" "Yes." "Sir, clear my schedule for the rest of the day." "Understood." He sat down, steepled his fingers, and stared at the photo on his desk. Nia and Nova, age 9, in matching lab coats, holding up a homemade volcano at the science fair, smiles too big for their faces. They had no idea yet how often the world would ask them to shrink. And he was done letting it happen. Meanwhile, on Flight 709, the plane was quiet. No one spoke. The engine still idled, but the aircraft had stopped moving. Nia sat upright, her fingers curled loosely around her phone. "Did he sound mad?" Nova asked. Nia shook her head. "No. Worse." "What's worse than mad?" He sounded focused. Just then, the pitch of the engines changed. The rumble shifted downward. The plane wasn't accelerating. It was turning. Passengers looked around, puzzled. Whispers began. The view from the windows confirmed it. They weren't heading toward the runway anymore. They were going back. Claire Denton reemerged from the cockpit, eyes narrowed. Her confident stride had turned tight and clipped. She wasn't in control anymore, and she knew it. "Mrs." Ellery sat upright, confused. "What's happening?" she asked. No one answered, but Nia and Nova sat quietly, waiting. The plane made a slow, deliberate turn back toward the terminal. The shift in movement was subtle, but unmistakable. For those who paid attention to aircraft, it was the difference between ascent and descent, between progress and consequence. Passengers in first class looked around, confused. The hushed bubble of privilege had ruptured. Margot Ellery leaned forward in her seat and pressed the service button with a manicured finger, her bracelet clinking softly as she moved. Claire Denton appeared a moment later, no longer walking like she ruled the aisle. "Why are we turning?" Margot asked, her voice loud, laced with irritation. Claire forced a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "There's been an adjustment from the captain. Please remain seated." Margot's mouth tightened. "This has to do with those girls, doesn't it?" Claire didn't answer. She just stepped away, quickening her pace toward the galley. From where she stood, she could hear the engines throttling down, Her chest felt tight. She knew the rules, knew the chain of command, but she also knew the feel of something slipping through her fingers. This wasn't going the way she thought it would. Behind her, Nia and Nova Caldwell remained silent. They hadn't said a word since the announcement. They didn't need to. The message was in the movement of the plane. Nova glanced toward her sister. "Is this him?" Nia gave a small nod. Her voice was quiet, but certain. "He's not letting it go." Nova turned her head toward the window, watching the terminal grow closer. A strange mix of anxiety and relief filled her chest. She had spent her entire life learning how to avoid conflict, how to stay small, unnoticed, unbothered. Now she realized that being invisible wasn't safety. It was surrender. The aircraft eased into a soft glide, wheels touching down with a thud that felt final. The jet bridge was already extending toward them. A ripple of whispers spread from economy to business, then forward. Some passengers checked their phones. Others looked to the front, expecting answers that never came. Then the captain's voice returned. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Due to an issue that requires in-person attention from our ground operations team, we have returned to Gate C-14. Please remain seated until further instructions." The intercom clicked off. A heartbeat passed, then another, and then the door opened. But it wasn't a smiling gate agent who appeared. It was a man in a dark suit, early 50s. No smile. He moved with urgency, flanked by two security officers in airport uniforms. Behind them came a second man sweating, pale, and clearly not accustomed to moving quickly. His tie was loosened, his brow damp. He clutched a phone in one hand and a folder in the other. That man was Malcolm Cho. He paused just inside the cabin and scanned the aisle. His eyes landed on Nia and Nova Caldwell. He exhaled slowly and stepped forward. Passengers shifted. Someone in row 2 muttered, "That's corporate." Claire Denton appeared from the galley and immediately stiffened. "Mr. Cho," she said, smiling nervously. "This is all a misunderstanding. I've already briefed the captain." Malcolm raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "I'm not here to hear your version," he said. His voice was quiet, but absolute. "I'm here to fix a mistake." He turned and walked to the front row. Then, in full view of everyone in first class, he crouched down slightly so he was eye level with the twins. Miss Caldwell," he said. "On behalf of Orion Air, I want to extend my sincerest apologies for what you've experienced." Nia blinked. Nova sat frozen, unsure whether to respond or breathe. "We are deeply sorry," he continued, his voice steady. "You deserved better than what happened on this flight." Nia gave a small nod. "Thank you." Then Malcolm stood. He turned back to Claire Denton. "You are relieved of duty effective immediately. Gather your belongings and exit the aircraft." Claire's mouth dropped open. "Excuse me. You're being removed from this flight. HR will be waiting for you at the terminal. This is non-negotiable." Claire glanced around the cabin, looking for support. She found none. The passengers who had once smiled at her were now staring through her. She turned toward Margot Ellery, who raised her eyebrows but said nothing. Claire's face crumbled. She swallowed hard, then turned and moved to the crew storage, her hands shaking as she retrieved her small roller bag. As she wheeled it back up the aisle, she paused beside Nia. Her lips moved, but no words came. Nia looked up at her calmly. Then Claire kept walking. The security officers followed behind. Silence hung heavy in the air, until it was broken by a slow clap. From seat 3C, Daniel Reyes clapped once, then twice. Others didn't join in, but they didn't stop him either. Malcolm turned next to Margot Ellery. "Ma'am, we also need to ask you to deplane." Her face turned red. "What, I'm not a staff member. I'm a passenger. I've done nothing wrong. You made racially charged comments toward other passengers. That violates our code of conduct. My husband is George Ellery," she hissed. "He sits on the board of Haven Tech Global. Do you know what that means?" "I do," Malcolm replied. "And I'm sure he'll understand why we couldn't ignore what happened here." "You'll regret this," she spat. "No," Malcolm said. "You will." The officers gestured gently. Margot stood, grabbing her designer handbag with stiff fingers, and stalked up the aisle. When the door closed again, the cabin let out a collective breath. Nia looked at Nova. Still scared, Nova nodded. "Yeah, but also kind of proud." Nia smiled. "For both of us." The overhead speaker crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again for your patience. We are now cleared for departure. Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." And with that, Flight 709 turned back toward the runway. But this time, everything felt different. Because this time, they weren't alone. The moment the cabin door clicked shut behind Claire Denton and Margot Ellery, the silence inside first class became something new. Not the brittle quiet of tension, but the stunned quiet of recalibration. Every passenger was reprocessing what they'd just seen. It wasn't every day you watched a plane reverse course for two teenage girls. It wasn't every day you witnessed consequences unfold in real time. Flight 709 hadn't moved yet, but inside the cabin, the narrative had already shifted. Eli, the younger flight attendant, emerged from the galley. His eyes flicked to the now empty crew jump seat at the front. He swallowed once, then looked at the twins. "Can I get you that orange juice now?" he asked gently. Nia smiled, soft but tired. "Yes. Thank you. Still just water for me," Nova added. Eli nodded. "And maybe a new blanket, too. Fresh out of the drawer." "Yes, please," Nia said. He disappeared quickly. Nova let out a long breath, sinking into her seat like her spine had finally released. Her hands were still folded tightly on her lap, but her shoulders no longer curled inward. "I can't believe they're gone," she whispered. Nia looked out the window. They really deplaned them. In front of everyone. They earned it. Nova sat quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It didn't fix everything." Nia turned. "I know, but it helped." Nova added, "Even just for us." Nia reached across the armrest and took her sister's hand. "We don't always get justice. But today, we didn't walk away." The intercom crackled again. This time, it was the captain himself. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Thank you for your continued patience. Due to earlier complications, we have replaced a member of the cabin crew and returned to the gate temporarily. We are now cleared for departure. I want to extend my personal apologies to any passengers who felt mistreated. That's not how we fly." A few people looked toward the front of the cabin, where Nia and Nova sat. The twins didn't react. They didn't need to. Sometimes vindication didn't need applause. It just needed space to breathe. Eli returned with their drinks, 2 fresh blankets folded neatly under his arm, and a small tray of chocolate from the dessert cart. "I thought you might want something sweet," he said. Nova gave a small laugh. "You have no idea." Eli smiled, nodded once, and moved on. Daniel Reyes leaned forward from 3C. "Ladies," he said, "I just wanted to say what you did took courage. Not many people stand up like that. Nia looked over, respectful. Thank you. And thank you for speaking up. It helped. I didn't do much. You did enough. He smiled. I'm Daniel. Nia, she said. Nova, her sister added. Well, he said, here's to keeping our heads high and our standards higher. He raised the cup of coffee he'd finally gotten. They smiled. It was the first real smile they'd shared since boarding. The plane finally taxied forward, making the slow curve toward the runway. Nova pulled out her book again, this time actually opening it. Nia leaned her seat back slightly and stared at the overhead light. She was exhausted. Not physically, but somewhere deeper. In that place where tension lives and questions echo for days. She knew this flight wouldn't be the last time they'd be tested, but it was the first time they had answered back. She thought of her father, still probably pacing his office or watching the live flight tracker, waiting for the confirmation that they were airborne. He had shown up, not with press, not with threats, but with action, with accountability. That kind of love was quiet, fierce, and permanent. Nova turned a page beside her. You think this is going to go public? She asked. Nia raised an eyebrow. You think a corporate VP walking onto a plane mid-flight isn't going to make headlines? Nova laughed under her breath. Poor Claire. Not really, Nia said. Choices have consequences. Nova nodded. Do you think she's thinking about it right now? Nia turned serious. She's probably trying to convince herself she didn't do anything wrong. They were quiet again. The plane rolled to a stop, then accelerated hard. The hum became a roar. The windows vibrated, and just like that, the nose lifted. The ground dropped away. They were in the air. For the first time in hours, the feeling of movement didn't bring dread. It brought release. Nova looked out the window. The city lights of New York twinkled beneath them, slowly fading into scattered dots as they climbed higher. It's beautiful, she said. Nia followed her gaze. It is. They sipped their drinks in silence. Behind them, the rest of the cabin settled. The whispers had faded. People turned back to their routines, their screens, their pillows. But nothing was quite the same, because everyone on board now knew their names, not because they shouted, but because they didn't shrink. At that same moment, back in New York, Elijah Caldwell sat at his desk, watching the screen in front of him. Flight 709, in air, cruising altitude 33,000 feet. Arrival time, 7:54 a.m. Local Zurich time. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a long moment. His daughters were safe. He had done his part. But still, something twisted inside him. A cold thread of guilt, because as powerful as he was, he hadn't been there when it started. He hadn't seen the look on Nia's face, or heard the tremor in Nova's voice. He had moved mountains from behind glass walls. But that initial feeling they must have had of being small, isolated, disrespected that stayed with him. He picked up his phone and opened a blank note. He typed, "This isn't the end." Then he saved it and closed his eyes again. By the time Flight 709 reached cruising altitude, the storm had already begun brewing on the ground. At first, it was just a tweet. 6 words. Orion Air kicked them off first. Posted by a mid-level tech consultant who'd been sitting in 5D, it didn't mention names, no photos, no hashtags, but it caught attention. An hour later, a blurry photo surfaced Claire Denton exiting the plane, eyes down, flanked by security. It was retweeted over 700 times in the first 10 minutes. And then came the video. 12 seconds. Grainy, but clear enough. A flight attendant standing over 2 seated black girls. The audio clipped, but a few words rang out distinctly. "You need to sit down. We paid for these seats." By the time Flight 709 was crossing over the Atlantic, the words Orion Air were trending on 3 continents. At Caldwell Dynamics HQ, Elijah Caldwell stood in the center of the executive briefing room, surrounded by 4 department heads, his legal counsel, and a visibly shaken communications director named Jen. "It's going viral," Jen said. "We've got over 4 million impressions in under 2 hours. We've tried to contact Orion for a statement, but they're on total lockdown." Elijah stood still. His jaw was tight, hands folded in front of him. "Has anyone confirmed who leaked the video?" "Not yet," Jen said. "But it doesn't matter. The narrative is already out there." "What's the narrative?" Elijah asked. Jen hesitated. That 2 black girls were harassed in first class. That the crew tried to remove them. That only corporate intervention stopped it. And now people are asking why it took that intervention to begin with. Another voice spoke, Rob, head of risk. "Elijah, respectfully, we need to manage the optics carefully. You have direct ties to Orion Air. If this explodes, it could hit your board seat, your contracts, even your standing with the Global Trade Committee. I'm aware. I'm just saying this doesn't go away clean. You stepped in, and the world saw it." Elijah finally moved. He walked to the window, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. "I didn't do it to be seen," he said. "No one's doubting that," Rob said gently. "But the fallout doesn't care about intentions." A beat passed. Then Elijah turned around. "I want a statement drafted. Today. From me, not the company." Jen's eyes widened. "A personal statement." "Yes, I'd advise against that," Rob interjected. "If you say something emotionally, I'm not writing it with emotion," Elijah said. "I'm writing it with truth." Jen swallowed. "What's the angle?" "There's no angle, just honesty." He paused. 2 young girls asked for water and respect. They got silence and threats instead. That's not an isolated event. That's a pattern. No one argued, because they all knew it was true. At 37,000 feet, the cabin lights were dimmed. Most passengers slept. Nia and Nova stayed awake. Nova scrolled through her phone. Airplane Wi-Fi was slow, but enough to see the waves starting. Her name wasn't in it yet, but she knew it was coming. "You okay?" Nia asked. Nova looked up. "It's out there." Nia raised an eyebrow. "What is the story?" "Someone filmed it. There's a video." Nia sat up straighter. Us, Nova nodded. "I saw the back of your hair and the side of my face. It's not close, but it's enough." Nia's first instinct wasn't fear. It was exhaustion. "So now we're news." Nova shrugged. "Kind of. No names yet. But people are angry." "Good. You think so?" Nia hesitated. "I think silence never changed anything." Nova looked down at her lap. "But I didn't do anything. I didn't speak up. Not until it was already too late." Nia reached over, squeezing her hand. "You didn't have to. You were living it. That's enough. But you were the one who stood up." "We both did," Nia said, just in different ways. They sat quietly, staring out into the dark sky. Outside, the world was shifting, and inside, so were they, at Orion Air headquarters. Malcolm Cho stared at 3 monitors and a blinking phone line. The PR director had locked herself in the media war room. Legal was drafting contingency statements, and HR had officially launched an internal review into Claire Denton's record. But none of that settled Malcolm's stomach, because he knew this was bigger than one flight attendant or one angry passenger. This was cultural. This was systemic, and they'd just been caught on the wrong end of it. He opened his email. Hundreds of messages, dozens of media requests, stakeholders demanding explanation. His screen pinged again. A subject line from Elijah Caldwell Accountability is not optional. Malcolm stared at it for a long time before opening it. The email wasn't long. It didn't need to be. Later that evening, as Zurich's lights came into view from the cabin windows, the first official statement hit social media. It wasn't from Orion. It was from Elijah Caldwell. It read, "My daughters boarded Flight 709, believing that professionalism and humanity were universal standards. They discovered otherwise. I intervened because I had the power to, but no one should need power to be treated with dignity. If my daughters had not had my last name, if I had not had a boardroom keycard and direct access to decision makers, what would have happened?" We all know the answer. This is not about 2 seats in first class. This is about how quickly black children are seen as threats. It is about the gatekeepers who still believe kindness is conditional. And it is about the urgent work of undoing systems that allow silence to masquerade as safety. To every parent, every passenger, every person reading this, the cost of staying silent is always too high. The post was signed simply Elijah Caldwell. Father. The descent into Zurich was smooth. The sky outside the window was pale blue, the Alps piercing through wisps of cloud like ancient sentinels. Everything looked peaceful, timeless, detached from the chaos brewing an ocean away. But inside the cabin, things had shifted. Passengers were quieter, more respectful. A few had started offering small nods as they passed Nia and Nova on their way to the restroom. Not pitying nods, not performative ones, something else. Recognition, maybe, or solidarity. Nova noticed it first. A woman in a crisp gray suit lingered near their row after returning from the galley. "Your father's words," she said softly, "were the kind of truth people pretend not to know." "Thank you." Nova could only blink. "I thank you," she replied. The woman nodded once and returned to her seat. Nia leaned over. "Did she just quote Dad?" Nova nodded again. "His post is everywhere." "I figured." Nova turned her phone so Nia could see the screen. Thousands of reposts, tens of thousands of comments, hashtags forming, articles already being written in real time. And then a headline from a major network, "Black CEO grounds flight over racial mistreatment of daughters." The words felt too big, too sharp, as if the entire story had been squeezed into a sentence that missed what actually mattered. "It's not about grounding a flight," Nova murmured. Nia looked at her. "I know. It's about how often we don't even get to board one without proving we belong." They sat quietly, letting the engine hum fill the space between their thoughts. Nia reached for her carry-on and unzipped the front pouch. From it, she pulled out a small notebook, the pages worn from years of use. On the inside cover was a quote in her father's handwriting. "There is no such thing as being too much when all you're asking for is to be seen." She'd memorized it, carried it through school, through conferences, through every science fair where she and Nova were the only black girls in the room. But somehow, today, it felt heavier, as if the price of being seen came with a cost she hadn't fully prepared for. When the wheels touched down on Zurich's runway, the entire cabin stayed unusually silent. No early clapping, no fast seatbelt unclicks, just stillness. It wasn't until the seatbelt sign chimed off that the motion returned. Eli approached them as passengers began to stand. "I just wanted to say, again, I'm sorry for what happened earlier. I should have stepped in sooner." Nia looked at him for a long second, then nodded. "You did step in. Eventually. That's something." Eli swallowed. If you ever fly with us again, I promise. Nia stopped him gently with a raised hand. Just remember next time, it might not be someone with a CEO for a father. Eli lowered his eyes. I won't forget. They gathered their things and followed the slow shuffle down the aisle, past the business class seats and toward the front exit. As they stepped into the jet bridge, the cold air of early Swiss morning hit them with a refreshing bite. Nova turned to her sister. Ready, no, Nia replied, but let's do it anyway. They entered the terminal, shoulders square, heads high, and froze. Waiting just past the customs line was a wall of reporters, cameras, flashbulbs, microphones on poles. Nova's breath caught. Oh no. Nia instinctively stepped in front of her sister, like she had when they were younger and someone pushed too hard on the playground. But before the crowd could surge forward, a man in a black blazer stepped between them and the press. He held up a laminated sign that read Caldwell, Private Delegate. His voice was calm, professional. This way. Ladies, your father arranged secure exit through the diplomatic corridor. Nova blinked. There's a diplomatic corridor. There is today, he said with a small smile. They followed him quickly, slipping through a side door and down a quieter hallway. The noise of the crowd muffled behind them. Nia whispered, Dad really doesn't play around. Nope, Nova said, still catching her breath. Never has. When they reached the private terminal exit, a sleek black car waited outside, engine running. The driver stepped out, opening the door with a crisp nod. Zurich Palace Hotel. Yes, Nia answered, still slightly stunned. They got in. The doors closed. Silence again. Until Nova burst out laughing. I feel like I'm in a movie. Nia smiled too, her first genuine grin in hours. If this is a movie, I want the rewrite. Nova nodded. Same. But I think we're finally in control of the script. They leaned back as the car pulled away. Meanwhile, in a conference room at Orion Air's European headquarters, Malcolm Cho stood before a board of white, tired-looking executives. Across the wall behind him was a live dashboard of media sentiment. Red, flashing, deteriorating. This isn't a PR crisis, he said. This is an operational one, a cultural one. Someone coughed into a fist. Another man said, We removed the staff member? Isn't that enough? Malcolm turned slowly. If the only reason we removed her was because Elijah Caldwell made a call, then no, it's not enough. What do you suggest? Malcolm didn't hesitate. Mandatory anti-bias training, an independent audit of all customer complaints in the last 5 years, and public acknowledgement that what happened on Flight 709 wasn't an outlier. It was a symptom. A woman near the end of the table raised an eyebrow. Do we admit fault? Malcolm looked her straight in the eye. We admit the truth. The room fell silent. For the first time in years, someone at Orion wasn't trying to spin the story. They were trying to understand it. The suite at the Zurich Palace Hotel overlooked Lake Zurich, but Nia and Nova hadn't even opened the curtains. They sat on the couch, room service trays untouched on the table, the television on mute. Both girls held their phones, scrolling through an avalanche of headlines, reposts, and sudden fame neither of them had asked for. Nova finally set her phone down. I don't know how to feel. Nia looked over. About what? All of it. The story, the press, people calling us icons or symbols of resistance, like we signed up for this. Nia nodded slowly. It feels weird, like we're not even us anymore. Just a headline. Exactly. They had received over 50 interview requests in less than 12 hours. From news anchors to podcast producers to education blogs, Some were sincere. Others were obviously chasing the trend. Nova stared at the black TV screen. "You think we should talk to someone, like my camera?" Nia didn't answer right away. Part of her wanted to say no, to hide behind the curtains of the suite and wait for the world to forget. But another part stronger knew they didn't have that luxury. "If we don't say anything," she said, "someone else will say it for us, and they'll get it wrong." Nova sighed. "I know. I just don't want to be angry. I want to be accurate." "That's the hard part," Nia said. "Anger is easy. Truth takes work." The room fell quiet again. Then Nova asked, "Do you think Dad regrets stepping in? Making it all public?" Nia shook her head. "Not for a second. Back in New York." Elijah Caldwell sat at his kitchen table in his apartment overlooking the city skyline. He was still in a suit, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. He hadn't slept. His phone vibrated with incoming texts from board members, public figures, and even a few senators. Some thanked him. Others asked him to clarify his position. A few tried to caution him, but none of them knew what it felt like to see your children dragged into someone else's prejudice at 30,000 feet. Elijah tapped his laptop. An email draft sat open, addressed to the Orion Air Executive Board. The subject line was clear: "We're not done." He hadn't hit send yet, not because he was afraid, but because he wanted the words to land. He read the first line aloud to himself. "Institutional change begins when those with power choose discomfort over distance." It was something he'd written months ago in a private journal after a diversity summit. Now it had meaning. He added a line beneath it: "We don't need another PR committee. We need a new culture." He hit send and exhaled. That same afternoon, an unexpected post began circulating online. A former Orion Air employee, a black woman named Andrea Massey, shared her own experience. "I was removed from a training program after filing a complaint about racially biased evaluations. I was told I was too sensitive and not a good cultural fit. Watching those two girls on Flight 709 reminded me why I left aviation. Watching their father fight for them reminded me why I shouldn't have had to leave." The post went viral in under an hour. It was followed by others. A former flight crew member, a passenger from a 2022 incident in Atlanta, a now retired pilot who described subtle racial gatekeeping and rude assignments. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a pattern, and the world was beginning to see it. In Zurich, Nia and Nova were escorted to the Global Next Gen Summit by a private driver the following morning. Their badges had been pre-printed. When they arrived, a volunteer whispered to a staff member, and they were quietly led around the back entrance to avoid the growing number of photographers. Inside the conference hall, a small group of international students was gathered near the registration desk. One of them, a tall girl with deep brown skin and long braids, looked up as the twins entered. Her eyes widened. "Are you—" The Caldwell girls. Nova froze. Nia stepped forward. "We are." The girl smiled. "I saw what happened. My mom showed me the video. Said, 'That's how you carry yourself when the world forgets who you are.'" Nia smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's been a lot." "I bet," the girl said. "Still, you reminded me that it's okay to take up space, even when people think you don't belong there." Nova swallowed the lump in her throat. "Thanks," she said. "I'm Zara," the girl added. "Nova," she replied. "Nia." They shook hands, and something shifted in the air between them. Not fame, not fandom, just shared experience. The quiet knowing between young women who've had to navigate a world that doesn't always make room for them. Later that night, back at the hotel, Nia sat by the window watching the soft lights of the city below. Her notebook was open in her lap again. The same quote stared back at her. There is no such thing as being too much when all you're asking for is to be seen. She finally added a line underneath it. Being seen is only the beginning. Now we have to decide what we'll do with it. Behind her, Nova was curled up on the bed, scrolling through messages. She looked up. Hey. Yeah, there's a middle school in Chicago. They had all their students write letters today. About justice. A teacher tagged us in the post. Nia turned, surprised. What kind of letters? Letters they'd want to give a flight attendant if they saw something wrong. Letters they'd write if they were scared, but wanted to speak up. Nova paused, her voice low. They wrote them because of us. Nia swallowed hard. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. Some things didn't require answers. Only silence and gratitude. The quiet hum of the engine was a constant companion as Flight 709 carved its way across the Atlantic. Outside, the endless expanse of clouds stretched toward the horizon like an ocean of possibility. Inside, Nia Caldwell stared out the window, her thoughts tumbling like the restless waves beneath. Beside her, Nova flipped through the pages of a worn journal, her fingers tracing the lines of words she had written late into the night. They were reflections, questions, fragments of courage stitched together by the day's events. Nia broke the silence. Do you ever wonder what it would have been like if none of this had happened? Nova looked up, eyes steady but soft. Sometimes, do you think we'd be less tired? Less cautious? Nova folded the journal closed and met her sister's gaze. We'd be different. But would we be stronger? Nia hesitated. I'm not sure. But I do know this strength comes in moments you don't expect. In quiet defiance. In holding your ground when everything is against you. Nova nodded slowly. I want to believe that too. The plane rattled gently as a flight attendant moved through the aisle, offering warm smiles and blankets now freshly laundered. Eli caught their eyes briefly and gave a small nod, the kind of acknowledgement that spoke volumes, a silent apology, a promise to do better. Nia felt the weight of the day pressing against her ribs, but also a flicker of something new hope. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Elijah Caldwell was in a glass-walled conference room overlooking Manhattan's skyline. His team had gathered around a long oak table, papers and digital tablets spread like a battlefield map. He spoke with quiet authority. This isn't about winning a fight on a single flight. It's about rewriting the rules, about changing the culture inside industries that have long ignored voices like my daughter's, or worse, silenced them. His chief diversity officer, Monique, nodded vigorously. We're preparing a comprehensive proposal for all our major partners, including Orion Air. It includes mandatory anti-bias training, transparent reporting mechanisms, and community engagement initiatives. Elijah folded his hands. And the board. They're cautious, but I have their attention. Elijah's lips pressed into a firm line. Good. Because this moment isn't just a headline. It's a turning point. Back on the plane, Nova turned to Nia. Do you think people will remember us after this? Nia smiled gently. Some will, some won't. But it's not about being remembered. It's about being part of something bigger than ourselves. Nova sighed. It's scary. It should be, Nia said honestly. Change is scary. The cabin lights dimmed as passengers settled in for the long haul. The twin screens lit up with emails and messages, an invitation to speak at a university forum, a thank you note from a civil rights group, a comment from a young girl in Texas who said, Because of you, I know my voice matters. Nova's eyes shimmered. Do you think we did that? Nia nodded. Yes, we did. In the days that followed, social media became a whirlwind. Hashtags like Cars Seen and Heard and Post Flight 709 movement trended worldwide. News outlets ran in-depth stories on racial bias in air travel. Interviews with Nia, Nova, and Elijah illuminated systemic issues long overlooked. Elijah watched it all with cautious pride. He knew the battle was far from over, but the ripple was undeniable. One evening, after a long call with Orion's CEO, Elijah sat alone, reflecting on how a simple flight had become a catalyst for conversations he had long wished to hear. He picked up a photograph from his desk, a candid shot of Nia and Nova at their 10th birthday party. Their laughter frozen in time, innocent and unburdened. He whispered to himself, "We'll make this better. For them. For everyone." Back in their Zurich hotel room, Nia and Nova prepared for a live virtual interview. Cameras and lights would be focused on them soon. Nova looked to Nia, voice barely above a whisper. Ready, Nia took a deep breath. As ready as we'll ever be. Together, they stepped into the frame. The world was watching, but this time, they were no longer just passengers. They were leaders. The plane touched down at JFK International Airport just as dawn broke over the horizon. The sky was painted in soft hues of pink and gold, a new day promising new beginnings. Nia and Nova Caldwell sat side by side, their hands intertwined. Their faces were calm, but carried the quiet weight of what they had endured and what lay ahead. As the cabin lights brightened and passengers stirred, the twins felt a deep sense of completion, not of an ending, but of a journey, one that had started with an orange juice request and ended with a movement that would ripple far beyond the confines of Flight 709. The jet bridge extended, and the door opened to a gentle swell of morning air. They stepped down, surrounded by a small entourage arranged by their father's team. Press were kept at bay behind barriers, but the faint murmur of cameras and whispers was unmistakable. Nia breathed deeply. "We made it." Nova nodded, her eyes scanning the faces waiting for them. Friends, family, advocates, strangers turned allies. Their father, Elijah Caldwell, stepped forward, arms open. His smile was wide, proud, but tempered by the knowledge of battles still to fight. He pulled them into a firm embrace. "You were both incredible." Nia looked up at him. "We couldn't have done it without you." Elijah shook his head gently. "No, you did all the hard work." In the days that followed, the Caldwell family became a symbol not just of struggle, but of hope and transformation. Elijah's public statement sparked real change. Orion Air announced a comprehensive overhaul of its policies, including mandatory anti-bias training and a new independent review board. Other airlines followed suit. Industry leaders began conversations that had long been overdue. But for Nia and Nova, the change was deeply personal. They returned to school, to their studies, to the life they had fought so hard to defend. Yet nothing was quite the same. They were seen now not just as brilliant students, but as voices for a generation that refused to be silenced. One afternoon, months later, Nia sat in her dorm room at MIT, surrounded by textbooks and notes. Her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Zara, the girl they had met in Zurich. "We're starting a club, Advocates for Equity in STEM. Would love for you and Nova to join." Nia smiled. She typed back, "Count us in." Nova entered the room, her laptop open to a research article on AI ethics, ready to change the world. Nia laughed softly, always. They shared a look, a quiet promise that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Back in New York, Elijah stood by the window of his office. The city stretched below him, vast and vibrant. He thought of his daughters, stronger, wiser, and fearless. His phone chimed. A text from a board member, Elijah. The new policies passed unanimously. This is the beginning. He smiled, typing back, "It's only the beginning." He placed his phone down and looked out once more. The horizon was wide. The future was theirs to shape. The story of Nia and Nova Caldwell is a testament to the power of resilience and the importance of standing up in the face of injustice. Their journey began on a flight, but it soared far beyond, touching lives and sparking conversations that will resonate for years to come. This is not just their story. It is a call to action for each of us to recognize when someone is being denied dignity and to use whatever power we have to make things right. Because change, like flight, begins with a single, brave step. This story of Nia and Nova Caldwell reminds us all that discrimination is not just an isolated moment. It's a wound that cuts deep, often hidden in plain sight. But it also shows us the unbreakable power of love, courage, and standing up for what's right, even when the odds feel impossible. The twins' journey from whispered prejudice to loud justice is a call for all of us to recognize and confront the subtle and not-so-subtle biases that persist every day. It's a reminder that dignity is not a privilege, it is a right. And sometimes, change begins with the smallest act, a phone call, a question, a refusal to stay silent. We hope this story moves you to reflect, to act, and to join the fight against injustice wherever you see it. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of courage, justice, and transformation. Together, we can be the change we want to see. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next story.